Hey guys, it's Melissa here from melissaoatman.com. Welcome to another episode of Awaken Your Inner Awesomeness. I'm so delighted you're here with me today. Today I wanted to address a question that was posed to me by one of my listeners, and I want to thank her for the question because it was a really good question, and it got me thinking last night, and I thought, this is an interesting topic. A lot of people are probably wondering this. So the question was, does wounding or does trauma lead to a spiritual awakening? Does it cause it? And that's an interesting question, and it's multi-layered. So I'm going to try to attack this in the best way that I know possible. So in my personal opinion, and I'm sure that you've probably seen this too, a lot of people who have experienced trauma have experienced a spiritual awakening. But does that mean that that is the reason for the trauma? I think the origin of the question is trying to figure out why do bad things have to happen to people? I think that's really the origin of the question. Why do we have to go through what we go through? And I get that because it's frustrating to think that you have to have gone through something that completely turns your life upside down in order just to find spirituality or to become enlightened or whatever. I do not necessarily believe that all people who go through trauma go through a spiritual awakening. In fact, we know they don't, because if that were the case, anyone in our prison system everyone would be reformed, right? There wouldn't be anybody out there still doing all of the things that they do, because once they experience the trauma, they'd have the spiritual awakening. Trauma does not always lead to a spiritual awakening. You awaken when you're ready to awaken, and for everyone, it's a different lifetime. So now I have to get into the fact that we have multiple lifetimes here on Earth. We experience different things in each lifetime. The other thing that is sort of difficult for our human brains to grasp is that time isn't really linear like we think it is. Time is actually more like the infinity symbol, which means that there are multiple lifetimes happening at the same time. That's a really hard one for our linear scientific brains to think about. So while you're here experiencing the lifetime that's currently happening, there's also another one happening and going on, and multiple. That's a really difficult concept for our human brains to be able to wrap itself around. But if you think about it that way, in some lifetime or another, someone is awakening, but it isn't necessarily the one that we're currently experiencing here. That's why some people experience trauma and they take it and they use it and they learn more about themselves and they try to heal it and they go through a spiritual awakening, and other people do not. If having trauma always led to a spiritual awakening, like I said, we wouldn't have the people stuck in a life of crime their entire lives who never change, people stuck in prison systems, all of these things, because people, once they experience the trauma, we know, or at least I know as an educator, that a lot of the behaviors, the addictions, the things that we see that lead to people living lives that are not necessarily on the up and up, it's because they've experienced trauma, and it is the unhealed trauma. So we know that there are people who go through their entire lives and they don't heal. And then there are some people who heal a little bit, but they don't heal the whole way. So you have really different stages. I've seen this in multiple stages. I've had relatives who were addicts and remained that, and nothing changed. And I've had relatives who bettered themselves and became good people, but there was still a lot of that emotional trauma that they never healed. So I think that there are different stages of healing, and I think you go through those different stages in your different lifetimes. So our souls pick the lifetime when we're ready to go through the spiritual awakening. So why do we have to go through trauma in order to go through a spiritual awakening? And again, this is not anything that I personally sat down and just done a ton of research. It's just something that I've asked and wondered about myself, and this is what has come to me as my truth. So take it if it resonates, and if it doesn't resonate, that's fine. You don't have to take this as your truth. But it is my personal opinion that we have to go through trauma in order to achieve awakening, because an awakening is all about learning. It's about growth. And if you were never pushed beyond your comfort zone, if you never had something happen to you to make you question your entire existence, like, why is this happening? Why are we here? You would never go down that journey of trying to do the research, trying to learn more. Awakenings, all about rejecting everything that you've known your whole lives. And for many of us, the trauma we experience happens when we're kids. And that's the very foundation of life, right? You come into this world expecting to live life a certain way, relying on your parents and your family to help you learn and to understand your place in this world. And when they fail you and when something happens, you begin to question everything, like all of the things that you've been taught. And that is the entire purpose of an awakening, is to realize that we get shoved into these little boxes. We get shoved into this system where everything has to be neat and orderly and it has to be a certain way. And then we start to realize that maybe that's not really the way it's supposed to be. You know, having grown up in a church, my niece and I were talking about this yesterday. She said, you know, she has grown up in a Catholic church, and she said to me, I don't understand some of the teachings because I don't think that you should judge anyone. And she, you know, being a young person who is very much, she wants justice and equality and all of these things, and it's really awesome to see a young person who really feels that strongly about that, and my daughter's the same way. And so she's starting to question everything that's being taught to her, you know, and she'll say, there are things I believe, but things I don't understand why we have to do this, or I don't understand why this is this way. And not everybody goes through that. Some people go through their whole lives and they do everything some people tell them to do because they've been taught that way and this is how we do it, and they don't try to push back or question anything. And that's okay too. I mean, it's not everyone is supposed to. We have to have people who challenge us. We have to have those people in our lives. Again, it's this challenge that makes you grow. So we have to learn how to heal our trauma. And in doing so, we're searching for the best answers. So healing trauma doesn't always lead to an awakening. No, some people will just go through and they just want to feel better and they're not questioning anything else. But for a lot of people, when they experience trauma, it does lead to a spiritual awakening. My personal belief is because the situation is ripe for a spiritual awakening. You're in this place where you begin to question, why me? Why did this happen to me? Why do those people have a good life, and why does this happen to me? And at first that may start to sound like victim mentality, and it might be at first. At first you might just be very upset and angry and wondering. But then that sometimes leads to this question of, where was God? Why was this allowed to happen to me? And then that leads to the questioning of, well, what is God? Who is God? Why are we here? It leads to all of those important questions, and those are the main questions that we begin to ask ourselves when we start to go through a spiritual awakening. And the one for me, that was a big one for me, was, Why are we here? What is the point of all of this? What am I doing here? There has to be something more than this. This can't be it. I couldn't have come here to live a life that was just terrible. Why did I come here? Why are we here? What is this about? And that's what it led to for me. I started asking those questions. So I started seeking those answers. The why am I here? Which led to me wondering if everything that I learned about in religion was true or not, because it didn't feel true. It didn't feel true to me, a lot of it. And that led me to questioning and seeking out answers, which I think is what a lot of people who go through spiritual awakenings, that's what we do. We're wanting to heal ourselves. But in so healing ourselves, we begin to start asking the critical questions that not a lot of people ask. And I don't know if it's that maybe some people just aren't ready for those answers or for the questions, or perhaps they just don't ever really get to that point where they start to ask those questions. They may only be focused on wanting to feel better. But for a lot of people, it's not just about feeling better. It's about learning how to live a completely different life because we're not happy with the one that we're in. And that leads to a lot of questioning. And I think that there are people who go through spiritual awakenings who don't necessarily have a traumatic thing that leads to that awakening. They just begin to question things because maybe things don't feel right for them. But it's not necessarily trauma. Some people get stuck in jobs they don't like, and then that causes them to wonder what their purpose is, and then they start to think about the bigger questions, and that leads to their awakening. But I do think that a lot of people have experienced trauma who then go through an awakening. And again, I think it's just that all of these situations have led to this. So going through what they went through has caused them to ask those important questions that actually lead to the awakening. The why am I here? Why did this happen to me? And again, I want to stress, a lot of people will say, why did this happen to me? There's a difference between victim mentality and wondering, did this happen to me for a higher purpose? It's that fine line, Some people who just want to know why this happened, they never move past that victim. Like, there's a difference. It's not just asking why this happened. It's asking why this happened and then actually seeking the answers. And seeking the answers, seeking the truth, that is what an awakening is. And it's difficult. So a lot of people wonder, why would I agree to do this? I think everyone awakens in one lifetime or another. It's just when our souls are choosing to do so. And a lot of people may not agree with me, but I truly believe we choose what we come here to experience. And it's hard for us as humans to imagine that we would pick the things that we picked in our lives, but I do believe we do. Because you cannot learn and grow if you don't go through uncomfortable situations. You just can't. So that's my take on the question, and I hope that I answered it thoroughly. Do I believe that trauma causes spiritual awakening? Not necessarily, but I believe that people who experience trauma tend to have spiritual awakenings more often because the situation creates a ripe environment for you to start questioning everything. And there are people who go through trauma, never heal, never awaken. They just go through this life staying the way they were. And we probably have lifetimes ourselves where we also did that. But as we evolve through each lifetime, we learn more and more. So those people will eventually go through an awakening. And if you're going through yours, which if you're listening to me, I'm sure you are, in this lifetime, just know that it gets better. But if you are sitting there questioning, the whys, keep doing that. Get very curious with that. Being curious about why I went through this, why I felt this way, why I had to do this. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. And those are important questions to ask. So continue asking those of yourselves. But instead of asking the questions that can't be answered, shift it to things about yourself that you can answer. Well, how did this make me feel when this happened? What was I learning? Did I learn anything? Be very curious about your circumstances. When we ask why, we will receive answers. And if you're having a hard time, you can always call on your angels to ask for guidance, to help lead you to the right answers. Lots of tools out there to help, that journaling, guided meditations, all of those things, the EFT, emotional freedom technique, those are all wonderful tools that are out there for you to use to help you continue to learn and grow. You know, we need to leave behind the low vibe emotions like the anger and all of those things. I'm not saying never feel it. That's not what I'm saying. But we don't want to get stuck in those places. And it can be very easy to. Instead, we need to move past those, move through them, experience them, understand why we're experiencing them, and move forward into new emotions that serve us better. So I hope that explained or was helpful, and I hope it didn't confuse you even more. But that's my take on that question, and thank you so much for asking the question, because I think a lot of people have questions we want to ask and are too afraid to. But I love when people ask me questions or get curious, because that's kind of what helps drive me to find the content that I have for the podcast and for what I do, because I want to give people what they want. I want to help people learn what they want to know. So I wanted to pull a card for you today. And the card I pulled is from Ask Angels, and it says, forgiveness doesn't mean the wound is completely gone. It means the pain no longer controls you or your actions. And I love that. That is so true. Like, when you work on forgiveness, it doesn't mean that wound just heals right up, but you're no longer allowing the pain to control you and to live within you. It frees you of being able to let go of the anger and the resentment that you feel towards whoever it is that wronged you. All right, guys. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here with me, as always. I want to send you so much love and light and wish you a beautiful day. I will talk to you soon. Bye, guys.